Are we land of the free? Well, it's going to depend if we're the home of the brave. What are we going to do with this information? And I encourage people to take these half-page flyers here, and you're going to see the blind chance perspective on one side, and questions for them are, where did matter come from? How did life begin? And also the questions to make people wake up are, who paid the biggest criminal fine in U.S. history, and how did Tower 7 fall? How many towers fell on September 11th? Who thinks 1? Who thinks 2? Who thinks 3? There was 3, and they talk about that on the Tucker Carlson thing.
Building 7 was never hit by a plane. Why did it fall down in exactly the same way the first 2 towers did? Why would our government continue to lie about it?
I can't answer the question. All I can say is it raises my suspicion. Wow, is that weird? These buildings being demolished, boom, just, free fall. Well, the only way that happens is if you remove all of their supports at the same time. You blow them all out so that a building can really free fall. If it's collapsing something else, it's like, you build like a fire and it collapses off to the side or something, right? So that was pretty strange. But, there was never a steel structure building that ever collapsed because of a fire.
But Building 7 was not hit by anything. It's actually quite a distance from the other towers. It's not right next door. That was not even included in the 9/11 report. There's no mention of Building 7.
There are some very legitimate questions, a lot of them, that remain unanswered. All swept under the rug. I mean, they were, and you look at this, news reporters were talking about explosions. By the next day, nobody was.
So that's how you get people to see that, hey, what they're telling us isn't always true. Okay, but then you got the errors in the textbooks. There's some websites that you can go to see that. And in the summer, check out your school textbooks. You're paying for them. You might as well see if it's there. And then I've got those listed. And then there's rescuing devices for a blind chance perspective for billions of years. There's things that can't last millions of years. So they have to imagine things to make them last millions of years. Like the Oort cloud. They imagine to be true, so we can still have comets. Like the finely tuned, the multiverse. They imagine that to be true to explain how we live in such a finely tuned universe. It can't be just, that couldn't happen by chance. But if there's infinite number of galaxies, we just happen to be in the right one. And there's the dynamo, which tries to explain why we still have a magnetic field, even though our half-life is 1,400 years for the magnetic field of Earth. And then they imagine dark matter so that we can still have spiral galaxies because they should wind up in 1 million years. And they imagine dark energy because our universe is accelerating is expanding at an accelerating rate. It's like anti-gravity, and they can't explain that. And then they also have to imagine something to preserve dinosaur soft tissue. They don't know what it is yet, but they just imagine that they're going to be able to imagine something that makes it work. And then they got wrong predictions. They thought that we had vestigial organs, and they took out tonsils and appendices, and there isn't purpose for them. And if you had them taken out, you're not as healthy as if they would have stayed in. And they were wrong about junk DNA. They were wrong about young galaxies. The Hubble Deep Field and the James Webb Space Telescope. We're going to see young galaxies and population 3 stars. And it's such a joke right now. Jason Lyle, he says, you're wrong about your predictions. And once you realize you're wrong, I predict that you say galaxies formed much sooner than expected. And he was right both times. So it's not a matter of if the Big Bang falls apart, it's a matter of when. And then there's a bunch of frauds that have been in textbooks and museums, like Piltdown Man and Nebraska Man and Orsi Man and Lucy. No, I didn't show you that when I was talking about it, but you can take one of these home. And then on the other side, or down at the bottom, or at the top, it's 6,000 years. When I was debating the scientist, he said, what points to 6,000 years? And I said, Uranus's magnetic field. Russell Humphreys accurately predicted using a 6,000-year model. Plus, he also accurately predicted the helium diffusion rate out of zircons, which won't mean anything to anybody, but it matched the 6,000-year line perfectly, not the billions of years. And then also the mutation rate. Ann Gibbons says mitochondria Eve, that's the first woman, would be a mere 6,000 years old. So astronomy, geology, and biology scientifically point to 6,000 years old. And there's a whole bunch of accurate predictions based mainly on the hydroplate. And then you're going to get this list of websites and YouTube channels. I encourage you to watch a video every day. And if you could do devotions with kids or something, every day. We have more evidence against the Big Bang and evolution than ever before. We have more easy access to this information than ever before. And it's broken into bite-sized pieces that almost anybody can understand. So we have enough information. We just don't have enough soldiers doing this stuff with it. So we need to get equipped to stand up to the battle. And there's websites there. I circled some of the hydroplate things, one in there. And also, long story short, that's phenomenal for saying how life, it's just so complex to sell. And I'm asking people to be brave. That's what Del Bigtree. I got, let's see, yeah, this one. I saw him in Alexandria. Now, I'm not an autograph guy at all, but if you're going to lose your job, I want to thank you and get your autograph. And so Del, he's the guy behind the High Wire. He won an Emmy with the doctors on CBS, so he's at the top of his profession. But then he heard about this CDC whistleblower that said, hey, we destroyed data that showed that the MMR causes autism. So he did a documentary on that called Vaxxed. So he lost his career at CBS, and he starts the High Wire. And he gets thrown off of YouTube when he's talking about hydroxychloroquine. And the YouTube numbers say 2,000 to 5,000 viewers per show. When they all had to go to his show, it was over 200,000. And now it's over 6 million. And he says, we may not be first, but we're going to be right. You know, I'm not presenting it unless we can win in a court of law, because there's a lot of people who want to sue him. And so I encourage people to be brave. Maybe, you know, and people who can speak out like me, I got to speak out. If my income doesn't depend on it, I got to speak out for those who, you know, don't want to lose their income. So what can we do? We can join or start a community action team. Get more involved in your community. And hopefully you can start, you know, they called me the Johnny Appleseed of creation, you know, in Virginia, where I'd scatter these seeds. But what I want to do is plant creation trees. Consider having a creation club once a month and have that right before. We meet in our public library once a month, and we do it right the week before the Creationist speaks at the University of Northwestern. Who's heard of the Twin Cities Creation Science Association? Okay, a few people. But the third Tuesday of every month, come on down. And there's some really cool things. We're going to do a creation tour at the Como Zoo. We did a couple of them last year. We're going to do it again, August 19th. And then that night, we're going to have something for kids. Brian Young is going to come in and blow things up or whatever. He's doing stuff for kids. I encourage you to have a booth at the fair. I love being at the fair because I get to talk to people outside of my bubble. And this is what I was doing. Should St. Cloud ISD 742 remove the errors in our textbooks? And I let people vote. You know, and it's a way to show them that there's errors in our textbooks. And then I was at the National Eagle Center in Wabasha, and I went in there, and they got this Tong child skull. It's like, what does that have to do with eagles? And it says that it's an ancestor to humanity, and I happen to have, let's see, one of these books, oh, maybe it's back there, a book by Dr. Carl Werner, The Frauds of Human Evolution. And I went out and I showed him that skull looks exactly like a chimpanzee skull. Why are you saying it's a human skull? And so we need to start pointing things out. When it says millions of years, like at Banning State Park or Jay Cook State Park, I go to the ranger station, I say, how do you know that's 2 million years old or 3 billion years old? And I did that at Banning. You know, I had a conversation going in talking about the kayakers, and then I came out and I asked them, how do you know that's 2 million years old? And they all point to the boss. And the boss comes up and says, well, that's what the smart people tell us. And I said, well, yeah, that's because they got a blind chance perspective of the past. It's like thinking this building got put together by chance. You know, it's absurd. And there's somebody one of the employees is in the back going, yeah. And so we just want them to think that that perspective is absurd. You know, and also you can get this curriculum. That book, it's The Grand Experiment. He's got a 2-year curriculum for about junior high, and he doesn't mention God at all. It could be in a public school. I encourage you to look at it, and it shows what's wrong with evolution and living fossils and human frauds. And so, yeah. And then you might not think you can do much, but you guys know how the Bismarck sank in World War II? This floating fortress, it was illegally the biggest battleship out there. These two, like Snoopy, you know, these canvas planes came in and had little torpedoes. It's like mosquitoes against an elephant. But that little mosquito hit the rudder and it couldn't steer. So thank God they gave them everything they had and see what God could do with it. Okay, we're going to wrap this up. To suppress free speech is a double wrong. It violates the rights of the hearer as well as those of the speaker. And we saw that in spades during COVID, didn't we? We needed to hear what they had to say. Who is in Facebook jail? Anybody? Okay, well, it's just me.